And heading to Montana, where he'll hold a rally tonight. The trip comes as he is reportedly expected to finalize his choice for the Supreme Court by today or tomorrow. A source tells Fox News he is done with the interview process after speaking with 6 judges. Welcome to Outnumbered Overtime. I'm Melissa Francis, in today for Harris Faulkner. As President Trump heads to Montana, we may hear more about his Supreme Court nominee. He's going to announce his pick on Monday, likely in prime time. A source tells Fox News that he has completed the interview process after speaking with 6 different people. Earlier, we heard from Republican Senator Steve Daines, one of the lawmakers who is going to play a role in confirming the president's nominee. He previewed what President Trump could say tonight.
Montanans want to see somebody who will work with President Trump. Case in point, this upcoming Supreme Court nomination. That's one of the most important votes a U.S. Senator ever casts, because this is a lifetime appointment on a court that is so important to our country. President Trump's looking for another senator that will work with him, and I think you'll hear a pretty strong message from the president today in Great Falls.
Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is live right now with more. John.
Melissa, good to talk to you. The president about to depart out of the North Portico here at the White House, bound for Andrews Air Force Base. He's doing a campaign rally tonight in Montana for the Senate candidate Matt Rosendale, who is trying to unseat Senator Jon Tester in the November election. And the president may give a tilt, if not toward the candidate that he's thinking about for the Supreme Court, at least to the importance of picking the proper Supreme Court nominee. And after his nomination and the confirmation of Judge Gorsuch last year, the president really likes how picking the right judge can resonate with his base. So where are we now in the selection process? Well, we have sort of divined by reading tea leaves and using our divining rod that Brett Kavanaugh, who is on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, who we caught up with this morning as he was leaving the House for work, is the likely front runner, or maybe in a jump ball with another appellate court justice. Some conservatives, though, are trying to take out Brett Kavanaugh because of a 2011 ruling on Obamacare that they say amounted to judicial activism from the bench. There are other conservatives who say nonsense, that Kavanaugh was not saying that the individual mandate was constitutional. He was merely saying in that opinion that the court did not have the jurisdiction to decide the case on the merits because of the Anti-Injunction Act. Judge Roberts on the Supreme Court disagreed with that. He ruled that the individual mandate was indeed constitutional. But the White House will have to mount a fierce defense of Kavanaugh if they decide to pick him. And not a defense among Democrats, but a defense among conservatives. Either a jump ball or the second closest running to Kavanaugh is Raymond Kethledge. He is from the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. Like Kavanaugh, he was a Bush-era appointee. He is 51 years old, Kavanaugh 53 years old, so either one of them could serve on the court for potentially decades to come. And like Kavanaugh, Kethledge also clerked for the retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. Conservative groups are happy with him, though his judicial record is not quite as comprehensive as Kavanaugh's is, which is why some people are putting him as the second choice, though I'm told here at the White House his stock is rising and rising swiftly. Judge Amy Coney Barrett is still in the running, but she's drawing a tremendous amount of fire from Democrats who fear that she would overturn Roe versus Wade if appointed to the Supreme Court. I'm told that the president would like to appoint a woman, really likes her, and thinks that nominating her would put senators who are camp in a real box here. How would you not vote for a woman for the Supreme Court if you are in a state that the president won? Regardless of who the president nominates, it's going to get a fierce favor of a conservative. All of the people on the short list, all of the people that the president interviewed, all of the people who are on the president's list of 25 would do that. So listen to Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland this morning about his concerns.
The list that's been prepared for the president comes from a group that has an agenda. That's what's at stake here. It's more than just one issue. It's the whole direction of the court to follow what the president wants rather than what the American people need.
Whoever the president picks and whatever he mentions tonight in Montana, we will be introduced to that pick Monday night. I'm told 9 o'clock will be the announcement. And just one other announcement here, Melissa, before we move on. The president has now officially hired the former co-president of Fox News, Bill Shine, to be his deputy chief of staff for communications. I've been running into Bill Shine on street corners and at the White House. Every time he says, no, I'm not official yet. Well, it is official now. Bill Shine is officially the Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications under President Donald Trump. Melissa?
All right, John Roberts, thank you for that. And as we mentioned, Brett Kavanaugh is one of President Trump's leading Supreme Court candidates, but the D.C. Circuit Court judge is facing skepticism from social conservatives who say he is out of step on health care and abortion, and that he is too tied to the George W. Bush White House. Jennifer Mascott is a former law clerk to Judge Kavanaugh. She is currently at the Antonin Scalia Law School, where she is an assistant professor of law. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me ask you about these cases specifically that critics are using against Judge Kavanaugh. One has to do with the recent case involving a pregnant immigrant teenager in federal custody. And he wrote a decision. So the teenager was seeking an abortion or access to an abortion. And he wrote a decision against the teenager, but they feel like the words of his decision didn't go far enough. Conservatives do. What's your response?
Well, Melissa, first, thanks so much for having me on. And I think the main thing, first of all, to know about Judge Kavanaugh is that he's got one of the toughest legal minds in the country. He's got a record of close to 300 opinions over his 12 years on the federal bench. And so the great thing about Judge Kavanaugh is that what you see is what you get. He's got a long record. And I think one of the things that you're seeing right now with some of the concerns that have been raised is simply that because Judge Kavanaugh has such a long record, and because for some time now he's been rumored to be one of the front runners, you know, folks are combing through the opinions, and it's sort of par for the course, perhaps, in Washington politics to try to attack and question somebody who's rumored to be the front runner. But he's very conservative. He's a mainstream conservative in the mold of justices like Gorsuch, Scalia, and Alito. He applies the text of statutes, adheres to the constitutional text, and if he were nominated by the president and confirmed, he'd be a thought leader on the Supreme Court for decades to come.
Okay, but having said that, I mean, if you look at the two opinions that are being pointed to right now, and you're right, it's completely fair. He's made so many opinions that everybody's going to find something that they don't like. But you say he's in the mold of Scalia, and the way that these are written, the other one is his dissent from the D.C. Circuit decision upholding the Affordable Care Act. He did it for technical and jurisdictional reasons instead of declaring the law unconstitutional. A lot of people feel like, you know, that's not what Justice Scalia would have done.
Well, it's interesting, the two opinions that you're asking about and that folks have raised questions about, as you point out, he actually was, in the health care case in particular, dissenting from a conservative judge's opinion that found the Affordable Care Act constitutional. One thing to keep in mind, I think, with how Judge Kavanaugh wrote in his dissent, which, as you point out, was perhaps more limited and targeted than some would like, is that he's writing as a lower court judge. And so he's got to uphold precedent. He's got to stick with the text of the statutes. And really what he was saying in his dissent, which quite frankly was to the right of another conservative judge who'd written the majority, is he was simply saying that he just did not believe, based on his understanding of the law, that the court had jurisdiction at that time to hear the challenge. But as you pointed out, he did dissent from a conservative judge's opinion, finding the mandate constitutional. Judge Kavanaugh wrote that the individual mandate was unprecedented in the area of federal law, and suggested that he did not think that it was lawful under the Commerce Clause of the Constitution.
How would you characterize his guiding principle as a jurist?
His guiding principle is to stick with the text of the law, the text of statutes, the text of the Constitution. He's not going to inject policy preferences into the law. He's going to call the law as he sees it, whether it's with his preferred policy or not. And he's been consistent, as I say, over close to 300 opinions on that front.
Do you feel like, I mean, everybody's trying to get a sense of, is this somebody that, I mean, you mentioned Scalia before, but is it someone in that vein, or is it someone who potentially down the line is more of a swing vote towards the middle?
Well, I think sometimes in the past, justices who have been seen as more swing votes later on in the Supreme Court have not had nearly the record of Judge Kavanaugh. Judge Kavanaugh, again, has close to 300 opinions. The president and others can look right there and see exactly what he stands for. And I should add, you know, he's been particularly strong in areas of separation of powers and reining in administrative activity. He has voted 75 times that agency action is unlawful. These days, with the federal government increasing in size, somebody with that toughness of conviction, that firmness, that steady hand is, in my view, who we need on the Supreme Court.
Unlike other guests that we might have on that analyze his legal background, you actually know the person. You know, what would you say about what kind of person he is?
You know, it's been great to know Judge Kavanaugh. I actually had the honor of being his first law clerk 12 years ago, and he is just a very easygoing, incredibly kind person. He coaches his daughter's basketball games. He keeps up with former law clerks. He's a longtime mentor to all of us. He serves meals through Catholic Charities. He's just a terrific community leader and a really wonderful, down-to-earth person that, quite frankly, you just love going and having lunch or a beer with.
Well, that's a pretty good endorsement. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.
So for more on who the president may pick and the battle ahead, I'm joined by Hugo Gordon. He is editorial director for the Washington Examiner. What did you think of what you just heard there?
I thought it was extremely interesting and absolutely spot on. I think that any of the judges who have made it into the final handful that the president is considering, and frankly, I hear it's narrowed down to Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Kethledge. These are the three who appear now to be the ones. All of them would be excellent judges. The concerns that are being expressed about Brett Kavanaugh are actually to his credit. He has been restrained, and conservatives and people who believe that judges should not be legislating from the bench should favor a judge who is restrained from the bench and doesn't sweep away something that's unconstitutional when he's considering it on a narrower issue such as jurisdiction. I think that one of the really interesting things here, Kavanaugh is a lightning rod for Democrats and for Republicans. Amy Barrett has become a kind of judicial star, and she's a particular concern to the Democrats because if she were on the court and if a case came up where Roe versus Wade could be restricted or even overturned, it would undermine their case greatly if there were a woman on the side of overturning Roe versus Wade. What they want to do is suggest that Roe versus Wade is all about women's rights. It would be much harder for them to do that if there were a principled textualist female judge. So it's possible, I think, that Kethledge is, as John Roberts was saying, becoming more and more the likely front runner. No resume at all, but he's perhaps not quite the lightning rod that the other two are.
Well, there's a lightning rod and there's the unknown, but when you talk about the lightning rod, there are certainly groups out there that are doing everything they can to influence the process and to put pressure on the senators who may be the swing voters. Here's just one ad. Watch this.
This is an emergency. President Trump has already gone to court to overturn health care protections for people with pre-existing conditions. 130 million Americans have pre-existing conditions like cancer, diabetes, and asthma. Now, Trump and Mitch McConnell have a plan to install a Supreme Court justice who will overturn those protections.
I don't know. The scary music certainly scares me, Hugo. What about you?
You know, this is what you have to expect these days. It's really interesting that a judge who is there to interpret the law as written and interpret the Constitution is being attacked because they won't produce the political outcome that the attacker wants. Look, either the Constitution says that it does apply to Obamacare and does apply to the issue of pre-existing conditions, or it doesn't. It was really interesting to hear Senator Cardin say that we should have a judge that does what the American people need. It's not for judges to decide what the American people need. It's for judges.
Fox News alert: an attorney for anti-Trump FBI official Peter Strzok now signaling in an interview with CNN that Strzok may not show up to testify next week, despite being subpoenaed by 2 House committees. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington with the latest. What are you hearing, Catherine?
Well, thanks, Melissa, and good afternoon. Facing a congressional subpoena to testify publicly before the House Judiciary Committee, and that committee has direct oversight for the FBI Justice Department, Agent Strzok's lawyer indicated they might defy Congress.
Why isn't it an automatic yes, Eitan?
Because we have come to the conclusion, we've been forced to come to the conclusion that this is not a search for truth. It is a chance for Republican members of the House to preen and posture before their most radical, conspiracy-minded constituents. From our experience with the committee thus far, it is obvious that they don't want the truth. They don't want to hear what he has to say.
Strzok refused to answer Fox's questions or any other media outlet on Capitol Hill last week, where he gave an 11-hour transcribed interview behind closed doors, the final 90 minutes. In a classified session, multiple lawmakers said Strzok refused to answer a lot of those questions, citing the ongoing Russia probe and the advice of an FBI lawyer. Lawmakers also pressed Strzok on the anti-Trump text messages he shared with his former lover and former FBI lawyer Lisa Page. These recent images were shot of Page shopping at a Washington, D.C. mall. Strzok's attorney also accused the House panel of laying a trap with the intention of seizing on any inconsistencies between Strzok's transcribed interview and his public testimony that's scheduled for Tuesday. Fox News has asked the House Judiciary Committee to respond to these allegations and explain what the consequences would be if Strzok fails to show up. Melissa.
All right, Catherine Herridge, terrific reporting as always. Thank you. For more on all of this, let's bring in Robert Driscoll. He is a former Justice Department official. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So what do you make of this? Is he able to just refuse? Can he refuse?
Well, in the short term, yes, he can refuse. And then it's going to be up to the Judiciary Committee whether they want to vote to hold him in contempt and then force him to testify either under threat of arrest or other compulsory means. But it won't happen, tomorrow or the next day. It's just another step in the process of the brinksmanship that goes on these kind of things when someone doesn't want to testify before a committee on the Hill.
Is his lawyer right in saying that these committees have just become too politically minded?
Well, I mean, I don't know if his lawyer's right or not. I tend to think, it's certainly not a legal basis. I would never have a client who testified on the Hill if, a preening congressman were reason to not testify. Right. That's kind of the nature of the game when you take someone up on the Hill to testify. Usually people have a more reasoned objection, like, oh, I'm going to plead the Fifth, or there's no jurisdiction of this committee. But to just say, well, they're going to make a spectacle of it, in some ways, that's the point. It's a public event. The imperfect as they are, the representatives of the people. So it's the people's chance to see in public this guy testify. So I think that's not a great legal basis, but it's certainly in the short term, he can just not show up and put the committee to through its paces to see if they want to hold them in contempt.
So some say that they could just release the testimony of what went on behind closed doors. The other side says that, well, that was his opportunity to get his, side of the case out there, and then he refused to answer other essential questions. So releasing the transcript isn't enough. What's your take on that?
I think, again, with our government, the structure of our government, one of the reasons Congress is there is to represent the people. And I think there's some public benefit to having public testimony. Now, it's probably going to get interrupted by things that are either classified or privileged or things like that. But I do think there's some benefit for the American people being able to have their representatives ask questions. Will it degenerate into a bit of a partisan affair? I'm sure it will. But that is in some ways what the system is set up to have. So I think that, from a purely legal perspective, fine, give me the transcript and I can review it and I'll see what he said. But I do think there's a political constitutional argument here that some kind of public hearings for these kind of things, as high profile as they are, is in essence what Congress is there to do.
Meanwhile, House Republicans are setting a deadline of tomorrow, yet another deadline, for the Justice Department to hand over additional records on the FBI informant who met with Trump campaign officials. Some lawmakers warning that if the DOJ does not comply, that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein could be held in contempt or face impeachment. DOJ says they already produced thousands of documents. I feel like I've heard this fight before.
I know. This never ends. I think both sides are trying to operate in good faith, but I think they don't trust each other, and that's the hard part. I think what's been missing in this is there's kind of been a little bit of an assumption on the Hill that I think that they get everything they ask for, which has never been the case. The executive never has to give over every piece of paper that Congress has asked for. There's always been an exception for things like sources and methods and other particularly sensitive names of witnesses and things like that. And so all these things are always negotiated.
Unfortunately, in order to negotiate properly, you need to have some level of trust on both sides. Congress feels like there's been some redactions of some things that should have been redacted.
Right, and they were redacted. I mean, you talk about the exceptions under which they don't have to hand things over.
Right.
And it's that the DOJ has said, you know, these are sources and methods, and that's why there's redactions, and that's why we haven't turned it over. And then when you do get those documents later, you know, the congressmen and senators have said when you looked at it, it wasn't about sources and methods, that what was blocked out was just things that were embarrassing to the FBI. So they do have a reason to not have a lot of faith.
No, I think that's true. I think the problem is that obviously, I think as Dag Rosenstein pointed out, you know, he's not the one doing the redactions, obviously. He's the DAG. They've got a staff of 100 FBI agents doing it. And when one of those, you know, agents does something wrong and it's pointed out, he can go back and correct, but it's hard to kind of blame him for the day-to-day document production that goes on. And so I think that it is, there's some reason for skepticism from Congress, but there's also reason skepticism from DOJ, because obviously they've provided things that have ended up leaked, you know, almost immediately at different times as well. And so hopefully they can get everyone together. And you know, the way this usually has to work is Congress needs to say the information they want, not necessarily the documents, and DOJ can say, okay, we'll tell you about it, even if we have to withhold certain documents.
Well, they did that, though. I mean, we have to go, but they said we want to know how this investigation started, and did it start before?
Right.
You said it did, and, you know, it comes down to they want to see the original documents because they're not totally believing the answer. We'll see. Maybe we'll get to it someday. Thank you, sir. Thanks for your time.
When we get to that day.
Right. All right. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making his third trip to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un amid reports that Pyongyang may not be giving up its nuclear weapons. We are going to hear from a former State Department official on that. Plus, President Trump is on his way to Air Force One right now, traveling to Montana, where he's targeting a Democratic incumbent. Can he flip that seat? The power panel weighs in next. Look at that shot. Beautiful. Not serious about dismantling its nuclear program. He is also expected to press Kim Jong-un on reports that he is doing the opposite of denuclearizing, as recent satellite images show improvements being made at one nuclear facility. Jillian Turner is live in Washington with more on this one. Jillian.
Hi, Melissa. Secretary Pompeo did depart very early this morning, right around 2 a.m. for his third trip to Pyongyang. In a tweet an hour ago saying, looking forward to continuing our work toward the final fully verified denuclearization of DPRK as agreed to by Chairman Kim. Good to have the press along for the trip. Pompeo will spend 2 days meeting with Kim and his top deputies and spend the night in Pyongyang for the first time. Now, this trip comes at a crucial moment when the very future of the nuclear talks is hanging in the balance. New intelligence reports this week indicate Kim may already be backtracking on commitments President Trump said he made in June. Now, with all the hullabaloo of the historic Trump-Kim summit behind him, the State Department says Pompeo will get back to the million-dollar question on the table, the future of the denuclearization process.
We've had very clear conversations with them. There will be no surprises in terms of what we are asking them to do. Our policy remains the same today as it was going into the Singapore summit. So nothing in that regard has changed.
National security sources tell Fox News there's still no agreement between the two sides on what precisely denuclearization means or on what the next step should be. The intel community is ringing alarm bells now, claiming new satellite images prove that Kim's making improvements to his uranium enrichment facility at Yongbyon, as well as 2 other facilities. But President Trump's choosing to remain optimistic, tweeting the day before yesterday, many good conversations with North Korea. It's going well. In the meantime, no rocket launches or nuclear testing in 8 months. All of Asia is thrilled. Only the opposition party, which includes the fake news, is complaining. If not for me, we would now be at war with North Korea. Trump's national security advisor John Bolton backing him up over the weekend, insisting no one in the administration is naive when it comes to dealing with this rogue regime. Melissa?
All right, Jillian, thank you so much. Joining me now is Christian Whiten, a former Trump State Department senior advisor, a senior fellow at the Center for National Interest. What's your take on this?
You know, I think this is actually overhyped in the sense that North Korea has broken some sort of agreement. Not an expert on overhead imagery, but the very minor changes at Yongbyon, which is really just building a hut there, also potential continued work on an experimental light water reactor. That's really not that significant. All of this could have been in train from before. And more importantly, perhaps, this leaked report of a classified production from the Defense Intelligence Agency and other parts of the intelligence bureaucracy saying that North Korea probably doesn't tend to give up his nukes. That tells us more about our own bureaucracy than it does about North Korea, because really those agencies have no ability to read what's on the mind of Kim Jong-un and the political trajectory of North Korea. They're just rehashing old points in order to cover their own posteriors in case this goes south.
When you talk about it, looks like he's building a hut. I mean, doesn't that sound like an effort to conceal something?
No, it's really, I mean, it's one minor building next to the fuel fabrication plant that handles, fuel rods after they come out of the old reactor at Yongbyon. There is some concerning work on a newer light water reactor, although that's less capable, less useful in making plutonium-239 that you use in bombs. And again, things in North Korea probably don't happen. They don't start or stop very fast. I don't want to sound Pollyannish here. North Korea has a history of this, but every government that has a nuclear weapons program takes some efforts to conceal its activities. It shouldn't be a surprise.
So what would you need to see and under what timeline in order to feel like they are really on board and keep the faith?
Well, with Secretary Pompeo going over there, and this is part of what came out of Singapore, and more important from Singapore wasn't just a piece of paper, but a meeting of the minds of the leaders. And so this is, starting to put some meat on the bones of whatever is going to happen. I think the most important early step would be a declaration that's full and honest of what North Korea has. Obviously, we have our own abilities. If you go back and look at the denuclearization of Libya, actually catching them in a lie, confronting them, and proving to them that we could catch them, we knew how to monitor their disarmament, was effective in finally reaching a final agreement there. So that declaration would be a great first start.
Yeah, what kind of time frame would you expect that in? I mean, do you think he should come back from this trip with that?
I think an agreement to produce that, it'll take some time. I mean, they have a very complex, very diffuse program based on uranium and plutonium bombs. So I would say, maybe summertime. John Bolton has said he wants to see major denuclearization within a year. So the front end of that would still take a couple of months.
Wouldn't you expect him, though, not to put everything on the list? And how would we verify it anyway?
Yeah, well, we have many intelligence capabilities, many other capabilities. They have in the past been duplicitous. The last time they gave a disclosure during the Bush administration, it did contain inaccuracies. All of these governments have a habit of concealing their sensitive weapons programs. We don't put where all of our nuclear weapons are on the internet, for example. Right. But hopefully they have, made this decision to fundamentally change the course of their country. This will be the first hurdle.
Let me ask you, too, about the meeting with President Putin. What do you think needs to be achieved? What do you think is the main goal?
I'd say two or three main goals. The first is just relationship building. That used to be the point of the G7 before it came ridiculous and they kicked out Russia. But you want these two leaders to have a relationship before a crisis occurs so they can talk. But there are two or three practical things. The most important, where we could actually get to yes, is agreeing with Russia to exclude Iran from Syria. That our goal in Syria is not to displace Russia or Assad, but we really both have a mutual interest in pushing out Iran. And John Bolton has telegraphed that may be on the agenda. Quickly, two other areas. One would be North Korea, and Russia could play a role in North Korea's economic opening if it does take the right path. And then oil. Perhaps I don't think sanctions relief will be on the table, unfortunately, but Western capital could help Russia export a lot more oil, which would bring down prices at the pump for all of us.
Do you think that Russia has any incentive to help get Iran out of Syria?
If it does, if it distracts, if it moves the discussion from things where we are not going to reach agreement, such as Ukraine, Crimea, which was part of Ukraine, and if it essentially not sanctifies but recognizes that Russia's presence in Syria, which a lot of people have hyped, but isn't that big of a deal. I mean, their naval base there is a couple of piers that are poorly defended and can't even service Russia's largest warships. If we sort of recognize that we're okay with Putin and Russia will have a role there, but the most important thing is getting out around. I think we have enough mutual interest to have some progress there.
But won't the left go bananas if that's the case? I mean, if we signal we're okay with Russia anywhere, they're going to scream Russian collusion, no?
Right, and this is the thing about the resistance, because we know they're going to do that no matter what. I mean, if Trump flew to Helsinki, met with Putin, and threw his coffee in his face, the left would still call that collusion. So if you're going to be judged guilty anyway, then you can sort of do what you want and reap the upside.
I guess that's one way of looking at it. Christian Whiten, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Melissa.
It is a race against the clock for rescuers in Thailand as they scramble to get 12 boys and their soccer coach out of the cave where they've been trapped. Why their biggest challenge could be the rain. Faulkner is following the story, and he's live in London. Greg.
Yeah, amazing stuff, Melissa. It's been gripping the entire world, really. Emergency teams fighting a whole lot of factors to try to save, to try to rescue the young soccer team and their coach in the Thailand cave after something like 12 days underground. Heavy rain, yes, predicted for this weekend, and that means the officials are looking even harder at trying something very risky, having them swim their way out, swimming, possibly using scuba gear, but that trek and swim takes about 6 hours, and it would be a real challenge for even a skilled diver, let alone these boys. That's why they're looking really hard at that. They're trying to pump the water out, Melissa, and they're doing a pretty good job of it. They've drained about 34 million gallons out of the cave. They've brought the level of the water down about 30%, but it is still too high. It is still completely flooding certain portions of the cave. The other options they're looking at, drilling another tunnel into the cave, or in fact having them wait, having the boys and their coach wait maybe months for the waters to subside, the rains, which are now approaching, to die down. That's not really considered a viable option at this point. Overall, the 13 are in pretty good shape. Rescue workers are with them all the time, supplying them with food and medicine, but the new report we got today is that at least 2 of them are quite weakened by malnutrition. So that makes the idea of all of them coming out together at the same time not really realistic. There are worries too. Remember, they have been underground for 12 days. There are fears that psychologically this could have a real impact on them. And they're running out of oxygen. Oxygen is being brought in there, and as the waters rise, maybe that breathing space goes down. Melissa, Secretary of State Pompeo has weighed in too. Earlier today, he tweeted, and I'm quoting, that the U.S. teams assisting on the ground will continue to work together to safely bring their boys and their coach back home safely. The U.S. military on the ground too there, Melissa.
Yeah, I mean, that was really my question. Other countries must be helping out, right? I mean, what is the rest of the world doing?
It's a global effort, absolutely. 17 U.S. Air Force specialists have come over from their base in Okinawa, Japan. It was actually 2 British cave specialists who were at the lead, who actually are the ones that actually found the boys back on Monday. Australia, other countries, France, pitching in, and there's about 1,000 Thai military officers, service members there on the ground. It's a massive effort, a global effort.
Well, we will pray for them for sure. Greg Palcott, thank you. And President Trump is stepping up his battle with Montana's Democratic Senator Jon Tester. You can see the president right there. He is traveling to a rally today for Tester's Republican challenger. He's about to get on that plane onto Air Force One so that he can head to Montana tonight. Jon Tester himself has an ad campaign welcoming the president to the state. Sort of tongue-in-cheek, saying thank you for signing the bills that Tester has sponsored. So you see both candidates here, rather than trashing Trump, kind of sticking to him. And you can see the president there as he mounts the steps to get into Air Force One and head to Montana in order to get there tonight, that rally tonight, for State Auditor Matt Rosendale is his name. We'll be right back.